Thanks.
Yeah.
But Grant and I have been chasing down kind of three questions when we talk to people. And one of them is, why do ghosts wear clothes? ET appear naked or without clothes? And why does the shadow man wear hats?
Right. Yeah. Burning questions here.
They
Yeah, the
sound
whole
so fun, and I just out of context list them like that. So good job, Grant. I like it.
well, yeah, but the question for me is, what if we're just talking about the same thing? If the shadow entities, ETs, interdimensional beings, what if we're all talking about the same thing here? And that was part of my presentation there in Laughlin when I did shadow entities as extraterrestrials. And I'm sure you're both familiar with the story of Albert K. Bender. And when you look at that story, you can kind of almost view it from one of three different lenses. When I first heard the story, it was a shadow entity, a shadow person type of a story. Albert K. Bender, he thought they were ETs. Other people think that they're the Men in Black. So which is it really? Are we all talking about the same thing here?
Yeah.
I think that's an excellent question in terms of.
Sorry, go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know if you've talked to Jacques about this, but I guess this goes to the whole idea of what is reality, what are we actually perceiving, this sort of thing, where, Jacques says, I'd be very surprised if this turns out to be just simply extraterrestrials visiting the Earth, that's the way I see it. So maybe give me I look at it like it's going to be 1,000 times more complex than people think it is. What would be your sort of take on how reality works in terms of trying to fit all these paranormal phenomena in there?
Great question. So as far as the concept of time, it's just, time's just a human construct. I believe that it's all working concurrently, past, present, future. We just, this idea of the river of time, that's just kind of our way to describe our reality. And I believe that there are certain moments in which different pieces in time will kind of bleed into each other. So I kind of always look at it. I call it stacked time theories, the way that I've been describing at least my theories for a number of years now. And I view it as, take a stack of photographs, like each photograph is a moment at a particular location. So whether it's, where I'm sitting right now, every moment that has happened, is happening, will happen, are all stacked up in this, stack of photographs. And for whatever reason, a couple of those moments sometimes will be resonating at the same frequency, and we'll get a glimpse into another point in time. So when we see something like an apparition, there'll be times where it might be a woman in a Victorian dress, and she'll turn and look at you as if you are the ghost. And really, we would call that like a time slip or something like that. It's not really a ghost or a haunting or what have you, but actually a glimpse into another moment in time. The fascinating part is, while we're looking to the past in that moment, she's actually looking into the future. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but
yeah. Well, let me do a related question that
sure.
Maybe clarify a bit. I was listening to Ions, the head researcher from Ions. She was talking about they had a bunch of channelers, 4 or 5, but they figured were like top channelers at Sedona, and asked them these basic questions. And what they said was that every message has a vibration, every person has a vibration. And there was 4 things, but the person has a vibration, and they'd explained that would explain why so many people thought they were Cleopatra. Like if you pick up on the Cleopatra vibration and run through it, then you think, well, that was me, this idea. Do you see that is like a lot of people would say it's all vibration? Is that the way you see the world in terms of how things work? Because we're having this argument on Facebook, you'll see today, where people are still on this idea about, there's this physical universe and there's these aliens who are oppressing us and, playing with us and stuff like that. And I'm not sure everybody is on the same page as you and I and Nicole in terms of this idea, even the idea that maybe all like an illusion, like it's a simulated universe, where most people are still in that physical world where there are little ETs visiting us and they happen to get lost, made a right turn at Alpha Centauri where they should have turned left and stuff like that. So go with that. I mean, do you have this idea of vibration being basic?
Oh, yeah, I believe we all have, our own personal resonance, our own personal vibration. Of course, there's a toroidal field of energy that extends out from us. And I think that's why at times when people wake up in the middle of the night and they see that, shadow entity in the room, that it's not necessarily that the, shadow is trying to, do something to manipulate the environment. Other than that, we wake up because we feel their presence in the room. And I also believe that, yeah, our personal resonance it's each vibrating for us personally on a little bit of a different level. I've been on my background is more of as a paranormal investigator. I've been on many investigations in which, we each see the same entity, but we all see that entity a little bit differently. A great example was there were several of us that witnessed rolling black smoke morph into the apparition of a little girl. But where I saw her fully formed from the head down to about her knees, and then she started to fade away. Others saw her from, the feet were fully formed and she started to fade away, toward the top of her head. And some just saw the torso. So I think that more adheres to that we each have our own personal resonance, our own personal vibration, and that entity, that being, whatever that is, also has their own personal resonance and vibration, which is why we're all seeing each other a little bit differently.
I keep thinking about these cases where you hear about people getting, like, I think I spoke to you in Laughlin about the shadow person that like flips the hair as you walk by, or I just heard a story. Actually, this is kind of synchronistic. I set up our interview and the next day my nephew told me about a shadow person experience he's been having.
Okay.
And he said it scratched his cheek.
Interesting.
And I mean, I know like with children, there is a lot of exaggeration, but my brother-in-law actually like confirmed like what was going on and said, yeah, he woke up and there was a scratch on his cheek, like something was going on. And I think most often I hear this one about maybe even it kind of ties in with what am I thinking? The sleep paralysis, or like you feel your legs being grabbed or something like that. So is that like a vibration or overlapping, or is that, something more?
The sleep paralysis, I mean, that's a real biological phenomenon. So our body will paralyze us while we sleep so we don't act out our dreams. But I think what happens when we wake up and we see these things, it's not like the entity that's paralyzing us, which is kind of what I was alluding to previously. It's that we're having an experience of two different phenomena at the same time: the sleep paralysis and then the supernatural entity there. And again, what I think is waking us up is is feeling that presence. Because this is an example I use in my presentations all the time, is that people with young children will recall that child has a bad dream or needs a glass of water to use the bathroom in the middle of the night, whatever. They'll come up and they usually tap you on the shoulder or kind of nudge you or what have you. But sometimes you end up with that kid. My youngest son Cameron was notorious for this, where he just stand there at the side of the bed and stare, and all of a sudden you wake up, whoa, Cameron, what are you doing? And and we would go and take care of whatever he needed. But what was it that woke me up? It was that feeling of his presence. But sometimes what ends up happening to people is they feel that presence, they wake up, and they just happen to be going through the natural state of sleep paralysis, because that does happen sometimes. But then they see this entity in their room. Usually you're not thinking entity, you're thinking there's an intruder in the house, somebody's broken in and they're in the room. So adrenaline starts to rush and all that sort of thing, but you can't move. And so it's just kind of this rabbit hole you start, diving down. And, later on, we start attributing all these other facets to this being that was standing there. And they just may have been, a lot of these just are watching, observing, you don't necessarily know why, but, most of them are rather benign. But then you have this whole sect of people that are like, no, they're evil and nefarious, or you get like the demon community. Oh, they're demons coming to do whatever. So
oh no, don't say the D word.
Can I jump in here with a question? Because you touched on a question. Another one of my weird questions is, you hear this over and over again, whether it's not so much shadow people but beings, where there's a light comes into the room, and the being is standing there, and the person wakes up and in this sort of ugly looking gray is standing there looking at them. scares the living daylights. It's got to be the most scary thing that could possibly happen to you. And you look up, and then your vibration sort of changes. You're in a trauma state, and then the being just says, "Go back to sleep," and taps you on the forehead. And then I asked the people, "So what'd you do?" "Well, I pulled the covers over my head, went to sleep." I said, "You did?" It's like, that's the last thing you think. And it was almost like, to me, it was like this. You'll hear with a lot of contact modalities, you have these things where there's always a trauma event that sort of moves you. And I'm wondering, like, why do aliens or shadow people wake people up in the middle of the night just to, it's almost like they're to scare you. It's almost, and my theory is, and you can maybe comment on this, is that they're changing your vibration, and then it's like, as soon as you change the vibration and you go into this sort of a trauma state, they say, okay, they're ready to go back to sleep, now we'll take you, or whatever is going to happen. That because it doesn't make any sense why they would constantly do this thing. You even talked to Tyler D, the famous NASA guy who had the inventions in Diane Pasulka's book. He had the being. I remember him telling me about the morning when he had the invention. He said, Grant, when I had that invention that came to me that morning when I woke up, the last thing I remember the night before was a hooded figure standing at the end of the bed. And of course, the first question you ask is, could you see its face? And he goes, no, I couldn't see its face. It's this weird sort of drama that goes on at the bedside that you're talking about. So maybe comment a little bit more about why they might be doing this or what's going on. It may be this sort of where you're flipping into their reality. There seems to also be this thing where it seems to happen over and over and over again.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that story, because I saw a presentation where you told that story. I bought the book, all that, and I've started relating that story as well, because that, to me, that story is absolutely fascinating. But give you a little background about me. So one of my first significant paranormal experiences was with one of these shadow entities. I woke up in the middle of the night. The thing was standing in the corner of my bedroom. Again, had no idea what it was at the time. I thought there was an intruder in the house. I had actually approached my bed. I'm trying to scream. Nothing's coming out of my mouth because I was a very frightened 8-year-old child. And it ended up doing something very unusual. As it approached the bed, it leaned over. I'm staring up into this black face. There's nothing there, no eyes, no mouth, nothing. No, it's just all black. It actually took me by the wrists, crossed my arms across my body, and then ran off down the hall. My reaction was not to pull the covers over my head. I found my voice, found my legs, ran off to my parents' bedroom screaming. And, they tried to console me and tell me that I just had a bad dream, but this had really happened to me. So, over the years, I've tried to figure out exactly what happened. I've had some people over the years suggest, well, maybe it thought you were dead and was trying to put you into a burial pose, and, kind of relating it to the Egyptian crook and flail sort of thing. Earlier this year, though, I had a hypnosis session. We did some past life regression, but the main thing I wanted to know was what really happened in this event. And so during the hypnosis session, it was really interesting, because I ended up having this viewpoint almost from, it was really like I was at the viewpoint from the shadow entity where that was standing at. Because I could see my 8-year-old self in bed, scared and terrified. And then I had this prevailing notion that this entity really wasn't intending to scare me. It was there to watch and observe and take notes. It had an interest in humanity and wanting to learn more about the human race, and didn't realize that I could actually see it until all of a sudden there I was, scared. And the whole cross my arms, I got another viewpoint of it, is it crossed my arms and kind of patted me between kind of the wrist, almost like to give me like a little hug or kind of reassure me that, kind of sorry, you'll be okay. And then it ran off to get out of there. So it was a really different viewpoint. One of the questions that came up as the hypnotherapist was going through this with me was, she asked the entity, where are you from? And the answer was another space. The follow-up question was, well, do you mean like another dimension? And the response was, well, you might call it a dimension, but we're from another space. So kind of cryptic, but I just thought I'd share that.
I first heard that story in the Cove at the Aquarius, Grant. We were all sitting around that big table like,
yeah, that does. I just had an interview. I'm interviewing these what they call themselves, the beings, but they say they claim they're the creators and whatever, and they're dealing with these two women in England, and that was the same thing where when they were asked, "Are you ETs?" they said, "Oh, if you want us to be ETs, we can be ETs. We can take you to our planet if you want, but no, we've always been here. You're the visitor." And you see that over and over again when people ask, like in the abduction experience, they won't get an answer. I remember the one Ron Johnson, very famous experiencer. I said, "Okay, so where did they actually say they were from?" He said, "I've asked them like 100 times. They simply won't answer it." And it's this idea that the more we go along, the more we realize this idea that there may be no time, no space. It's all here. It's all now. It's all singularity and stuff. And
Right.
so in 1895, they're talking to you and they said, "Where are you from?" And they said, "Mars. We're flying on these big wooden ships in from Mars," and stuff like that, that they talk to you at your level. Do you think that's possible where as we go along, the answer sort of changes and it morphs into more of what actually may be reality?
Possibly. It seems as we go along, the answers do keep changing on us. It's hard to know. I think a lot of times what's real, what's a hoax, what's just an elaborated story. Because some of these stories, because I've known people over the years that there's a grain of truth to their story, but they've kind of expounded upon it and elaborated. And so you kind of wondered, okay, I know that there's part of this story is true, but all this other fluff around it, I'm not sure. So it makes it hard to do this research.
Yeah.
So
I know Barbara Streisand's stepson is an experiencer. He told me that what
I've
they
talked with
told
him a
him,
couple times. Yeah.
yeah, is when they come in, they go into your mind and they use what's in your mind to teach you a lesson. That's all they can do. They can't really add
Mhm.
anything that isn't there or whatever. So they're playing off us. And that's the more I see, because I know I started in 75. I don't know when you started, but the more I look at it, the more I would say, like, I could never possibly believe that I would be where I am right now in terms of what we thought was going on in 1975. It's like it's a completely different world altogether.
Oh, it really is. And for me, um, I mean, my first little like paranormal investigation was in 1990 or 89 or something like that.
Yeah.
When I was 8, that would have been, I guess, 82. So I mean, it's kind of been a lifelong journey, but really, my deeper research has been over the last 15, 20 years.
And going back to the question that Nicole asked at the beginning was, so if the being is there, what's the thing with the hat? Like, why is there this sort of? It's like with people, especially the demons. Like, does it rain in hell? Like, why would it need a hat? I even asked. I'm pretty sure I asked Chris Bledsoe when he was because he was complaining about the shadow people moving along the walls and stuff like that. And I said, so I mean, what are they doing and stuff like that? And then I said, "Do you see the guy with the hat?" And he goes, "Yeah, I saw that guy." And I go, like, it's like just makes no sense whatsoever. So what do you actually do you think that they're like sort of playing to what? Are we part of the illusion that we're putting part of it in there, or are they playing to what we believe?
Yeah, because you see a lot of different style hats. So you'll see the fedora or top hat, a wide brim hat. I've heard one story of of one of these things wearing an archer style hat, like something out of Robin Hood, which is kind of bizarre. So I've heard people speculate maybe it's some sort of technology to make them shadowy like they are. Of course, there are plenty of stories and accounts of them not wearing hats at all and taking different shapes and forms and all that. I think in some cases they may be trying to imitate us or put on some sort of something that would be familiar to us. But in other cases, when you look at like something like a time slip or interesting story that was just related to me was about a hooded figure. And when this guy was younger, he had walked into the kitchen and saw this dark, shadowy, hooded figure there by the kitchen table. When he got older, he was at the kitchen table making a sandwich. He was wearing a hoodie at the time and looked over and he saw this smaller shadow entity like the size of a child and realized, wait a second, when I was younger, I was actually the dark hooded figure. So are we again? It's kind of one of those. Are we seeing ourselves here? So that's one of those almost doppelganger type of incidents. And in other cases, and this is a fascinating story to me. Walter B. Gibson, who wrote the under the pseudonym Maxwell Grant, wrote the Shadow stories, the 1930s pulp stories. And in his house, after he had moved out, people started reporting witnessing a dark, shadowy figure with wearing the hat. And he is, as well as John Keel, postulated that, well, this wasn't any sort of ghost, because paranormal investigators like Hansels were going in there and trying to research and figure it out. And some people are saying, well, maybe it's a ghost of a Revolutionary War soldier. And Gibson and Keel were saying, well, no, this is actually a tulpa, a thought form, where all the energy that Gibson had put into creating the character, the shadow, actually manifested itself there in the house. So, again, you have almost like a whole other type of being and entity there. So I think, honestly, I think these are a lot of different things, and sometimes they take on very similar forms that we are familiar with. So we could look at, a single hat wearing entity, and be like, okay, that's a shadow wearing a hat, but is it a human spirit? Is it perhaps a tulpa? Is it a doppelganger? Just seeing ourselves at another point in time. So I think it can be a lot of different things, and it's just a matter of researching that one specific entity to figure out, okay, what is this one here? Because it may be something different depending on who exactly it is.
Oh, I just started thinking of doppelgangers, and you always hear these stories, and I'm correlating it with this trickster element in our
Yeah.
phenomenon now. So that's
Well, and that's another idea that's been postulated too, are some of these tricksters that are, trying to take these forms. So it's, I know we're looking for answers, and I just threw out there that it could be like 5 different things, but to me, they really could be one of several different things. And it's a matter of researching that one specific entity to figure out what exactly this one is, because it may be different than the one over there at somebody else's house.
Can I ask about your personal situation? Because you talked about doing past life regression, and you'll see a lot of, like when I asked Mary Rodwell, if you regress somebody to be back to birth, how many will say that they chose to be in this situation? She said 100%. And so the idea is, you start at 8, you get triggered by this one event. Do you think this is part of your karma, your plan, that because a lot of people talk they can't get out of it? I mean, you couldn't quit if you tried. They sort of catch your attention. Can you look at that aspect of what's your role in terms of this? Do you think it's a random thing, or do you think that you have some sort of mission, or that you're doing on this?
Yeah, and I believe that I'm living that. So, it wasn't long before that event. I was 7 when I really took up an extreme interest in writing. I've been writing since I was 7 years old. So I think my role in all of this is to research, document, and pass on to the next generation. I have this really strong feeling that we get, the humanity is always repeating its history over and over and over again. It's like we forget things that happened in the past, we repeat the same mistakes, and so forth. And I believe that part of that is due to we're not documenting and passing on the information well enough, or part of it is half the time we're not listening. But I think it's our responsibility to pass knowledge on to the next generation. I'm not going to be here forever to get online to talk about this, or do presentations, or whatever, or put it into a book. At some point, the next generation has to pick up that mantle. So I think my job right now is to gather as much knowledge and information as I can, put it into the books, the videos, all that, and then hopefully somebody from the next generation will pick it up and keep going forth, and we'll can keep learning and passing it on.
Do you think that you're getting some sort of help, because you get these bizarre things? We talk about the trickster element, where it's weird. If it wasn't weird, you wouldn't pay any attention to it. I mean, it's almost like they do it to make it really weird because it catches your attention. Almost like, I don't know if you know the story where Nicole and I do a book on triangles, and then suddenly she's got a triangle on her wrist. She sort of looks down and there's this triangle on her wrist. And it's almost like this trickster element where you're sort of being led along to help raise consciousness, and that they're not going to be very direct. They're not going to land on the White House lawn. They're not going to tell us what's going on. They're using these symbols and weird sort of stories that sort of get you one piece and another piece and another piece.
Yeah, it's part of the learning process. I think we learn more from our own experiences and a lot of mistakes along the way than just from somebody giving us the answer. So, and that's what people want. They want to be given the answer, but that's not the way it works. We have to learn it ourselves.
And what kind of reaction have you gotten in terms of your writings and what you put out? Do you have a lot of people that still want to fight back and, correct you on demons and whatever it is? It's like,
oh yeah, I'll get all kinds of crazy messages and emails, and if people want me to, want to bring me to Jesus, or or they'll, and I'm up for a good debate on any topic, as long as it's intelligent and thoughtful. I mean, some people just want to bash you over the head, but if somebody wants to have some nice dialogue back and forth, any of this is up for debate. We're still learning, but I get plenty of some scathing remarks, and that's fine. Goes with the territory.
What about the ultimate issue that we often talk about, that I get a lot of attack? In fact, it's going on right now, is the whole good evil thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, is there a demonic force that's here to take over the world and it's fighting against God's forces? Or what's your take on good and evil? Or is it all just experience, like in a reincarnation world?
Well, I believe in reincarnation. So, and that's been tough for me over the years, because I grew up Catholic. So, I mean, that was very, strict heaven and hell. So it took me, and I have.
I think everybody grew up once Catholic, except me. I keep hearing this. I used to be a Catholic. It's like, right. There's nobody a Catholic. Everybody used to be a Catholic.
Yeah, and I have an aunt who's a nun, who's a mother superior of her convent.
Oh, there you go.
But what's fascinating is, because we'll go and visit her. She's a cloistered nun, so she doesn't ever get out. We have to go visit her, and the subject has come up many times about the work that I do in my books, and she's fascinated about ghosts and hauntings and all that. So she's really, really open to that, which is to me kind of bizarre coming from the church, but it's fascinating that she's interested in that. But yeah, as far as good versus, I mean, I believe, like I said, I believe in reincarnation. I believe that there are certainly entities that are more malevolent in nature, in that we might experience something that is trying to do us harm. But in all the years that I've been doing this, there's I've worked being in the paranormal field, people that are demonologists, quote unquote demonologists. And in all the years I've been doing this, there's one single case that I've been on that was actually deemed demonic. And the guy that I worked with that on, Carl Johnson, in the paranormal field, he's been doing this for 50 years as a demonologist. And he and I talk quite often. And it was only last year where I had him on my live stream show, and we're just, talking back and forth. And I asked him the question, Carl, when was the last, you research this is your specialty. When was your last demon case that you actually deemed demonic? And he said, Mike, the last time that I was on a case that I would deem, actually demonic and evil sort of entity was the one I was with on you 10 years ago. So here's a guy, this is his speciality. This is what he is supposed to do, is, deal with these demons, but he hadn't had a demon case in 10 years. So these are, a lot more rare than, there, you have all those television shows that every single thing that people are encountering is a demon. And that's just hogwash.
Oh, wow. One more question for me. And then I think you had some questions that you maybe wanted to ask Grant. So we'll flip the mic over here on Grant before he has to run off.
All right.
But, I think we say a lot that, wandering around these rabbit holes, you discover that you're looking for something out there, but you discover that it's an inward journey. And a lot of these journeys do take us places in our life. And I kind of funnily think in my head, all roads lead to Hal Puthoff and Egypt. So I know you went to Egypt. Did you discover something? Did you gain some insight from your travels there? And tell me all about it.
Yeah, Egypt was fascinating. Can't wait to get back there. I'm working with Mohammed Ibrahim on doing a follow-up tour there. It's the Great Pyramid. I had some interesting experiences within. I mean, really looking at the architecture. I mean, I could, yeah, I could certainly feel a resonance there. And but really, I suddenly got fascinated with kind of the hidden history of that location. In the Queen's Chamber and the uh, kind of the niche that's back there, and seeing the vitrification and the scorching of the stone, and then up in the King's Chamber, looking at that coffer that's there that they try to say is a sarcophagus, and I'm looking at it, and noticing that the back uh, I guess ledge on that is at a different height than the sides and the front. I was just kind of scratching my head. It's like, if there was a lid on this, and there's actually 3 holes in the back there, then it would had to slide in from the back, and you kind of see a little lip around it on those other 3 edges. And so I'm showing this to Mohammed. He's like, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I actually never noticed that. Here's a guy, this has been his life. And so throughout the rest of the tour, whenever we'd encounter some sort of sarcophagus or what have you, we were looking at the construction of it and comparing it to what we saw there in the King's Chamber, and there was nothing like what we saw there in the King's Chamber. So to me, that just confirmed for me that, okay, what's there at the Great Pyramid is somebody else built that than the dynastic Egyptians. And so that was just a fascinating moment for me. Aside from all I mean, to me, the whole place was just majestic. So it was almost like a spiritual experience for me just being there. It was the first time. So yeah, I'm going to feel that.
So what's your theories? If they're not tombs, what are they in your opinion? What do you think the pyramids are?
Yeah, Chris Dunn's ideas about it being a power plant are pretty interesting. So I think he's certainly onto something there. I don't know if his ideas of precisely how it worked are accurate, because we went down into the subterranean chamber. We had the whole pyramid to ourselves for 2 hours, which was amazing. Yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
So and so his ideas of what's going on there in the subterranean chamber, like, I don't know. But a lot of his other ideas of how the resonance would have worked within the pyramid is like, okay, I can see that, and especially with a lot of his other ideas of stone cutting and things like that. Because my father, like Christopher, was a machinist, and so looking at some of those cuts, and I came back with all kinds of photos from Egypt. I'm like, Dad, look at this. Tell me what cut this. And he's like, well, that would have been a diamond tip saw, which they weren't supposed to have back then.
Right. Alien lasers. That's
right.
So did you get to check out any of, I think they're called these resonance chambers, and how we were talking about like vibrations, or maybe even raising or changing vibrations? Did you get to check out any of those? I think they're sound or harmonic chambers.
Well, and that was interesting with the Great Pyramid. So one of the ideas about the Grand Galleries is supposed to have a resonance, but Tom Danley had done some research there some years back, and discovered that the Great Pyramid is tuned to the key of F sharp, which is supposed to be the harmonic key of the Earth. And so I brought a chromatic tuner with me to test that out, and sure enough, it is F sharp. So that was really fascinating.
Hear that, Grant?
Yeah, well, let me jump in with a question. Let me jump in with a question. Then I don't do much on the pyramids, but I do know that Nicole's friend Gary Osborne, they're about to come out with a second book. Jim Peniston, we talked to Jim Peniston.
I have, yeah.
And that's this whole deal where you start to see that everything's linked, where he touches this thing on the side of the craft, and suddenly he's getting all this pyramid geometry, and the world's all linked up and everything's connected. And so they're supposed to come out with the second book. I sort of left it because it was sort of over my head. It just sort of give me a headache. So I just sort of left it, but that must have intrigued you.
Yeah, no, his book, The Rendlesham Enigma, that is a huge book. So, I got through some of it, and I've interviewed Jim a couple of times, but
the last 2 chapters is the best. I'm like, ooh, get to the next stuff. Like, I'm out of the forest now. I want the rest. So.
Right. No, but it's fascinating, and I do believe everything is connected. So, I have a website. It's an online learning platform that's called the Connected Universe Portal, and the idea that everything's connected, and the weekly interactive class that we have on there is called Connecting the Universe. So yeah, I do believe everything is connected some way, shape, or form.
Wow. And my publishing company is called It's All Connected, all one word.
Oh, there you go.
So it is all connected.
It is.
Interesting. You did reincarnation stuff in terms of, did you find anything out in terms of past lives that would indicate? Because I remember I released Chris Bledsoe's transcript where, he's there and he's being regressed by this Harvard psychiatrist, 2008. And they said, when did you first encounter them? And he said, they've been with me since before I was born. And he said, what? They were with you in a past lifetime? Yes. So did you find anything in your past lives that would indicate, that would tie into what you're doing now?
Yeah. So on two levels. So one, and this did not come out through a regression, but I believe it was a dream of a past death that I had, and it would have been the Vietnam War, because it was basically jungle warfare, and we're out there shooting across the jungle at the kind of quote unquote bad guys, and all of a sudden one of them popped up right in front of me, point blank to my forehead, pulled the trigger, and which was of course really disconcerting. It was bizarre though, because I suddenly saw this vivid, interesting colors, almost like a kaleidoscope or melted crayon sort of thing, and then that kind of dissipated, and I was back in the jungle, but nobody else was around. And I was born in 74, so if that was, it makes sense if that would have been my life before this one, and I would have died there and then reincarnated in this one, and I ended up in the military, in the U.S. Air Force for 6 years. So aside from that, though, during the regression that I had earlier this year, this was more medieval time, and I had a position basically as a scribe for, and I don't know what sort of religious order it was, but it was one that was against the church, and we ended up being executed for our beliefs. But most of the regression was going to the house, and I had a daughter, and then being there with some of the leaders of this movement and just writing down all the different thoughts and ideas and that sort of thing. So that, being a writer, that coincides very well with what I'm doing now, what I had done during that past life.
Wow. It was Preston Dennett's work and his lecture where it first clicked with me that you get taken back to your death moment. And that just I was like, oh, that weird one makes sense to me now. Yeah. That I had never thought about, you go back to the end first. But okay, Mike, I know you mentioned that you wanted to ask.
Hang on, I got a few more questions yet.
Oh, Grant, keep going.
Go ahead.
I'm trying to keep you on time, Grant.
No, I've got an hour yet. I don't go till
good.
2:00 Central. It's only 12:45, right?
I don't know. I can't see a clock.
Yeah. Okay. I've still got.
That's about that.
You mentioned being in the U.S. Air Force. My father was in the Canadian Air Force. So let me ask you about the present state of affairs. And we have this sort of situation where it looks like they're trying to build weapons. They're doing this, the threat thing and all that kind of stuff. Do you think that the people that are in charge realize the sort of the stuff we're talking about today, this idea that it may be all connected, that there's these vibrations, that it may not EBT? What's your take on what's going on in terms of disclosure today?
Well, in terms of disclosure, of course, they're not giving us any information. We saw the disclosure document there back in June, which told us a whole lot of nothing. Yeah. I don't know what people really expected if they were, thought the government was going to come forward and say, "Oh yeah, we've been talking with ETs all this time." No, that document was a joke, and I pretty much expected as much. But yeah, there is definitely something going on with other life forms, as far as whether it's research contact. When I was in the Air Force, I didn't have any direct contact with that. I did spend some time at NSA, mostly on surveillance side. I was a computer systems administrator, a network administrator there. So I was really just kind of supporting those type of guys. But that said, even though I didn't have the need to know to get into some of those different areas, I could at least see that, okay, they're doing something with extraterrestrial research over here. I couldn't see specifically what, but I could at least see that something's going on over there. So yeah, I believe that that there is a presence, that the government is certainly withholding that from us. I know there's a second part to your question there.
I've forgotten it already, but let me do this sort of related question in terms of who actually knows, because we always use the word government. So you hear Lou Elizondo talking, and they're always talking about like this thing about when you get close, the people have the sunburns, and you get real close, the time space sort of breaks down and stuff like that. And then you hear these things like I brought up about with the latest Skinwalker book, that I'm very close friends with Chris Bledsoe, and of course there's this story that Tyler D, this famous guy from NASA, comes in and gets all the information and goes and takes it and briefs it to the president of the United States at Camp David, and that's not in the book. So where do you think the actual information lies? It seems to me like it may even be like a distraction, that we're doing this thing, we're trying to raise money for weapon research, like we got a cure to cancer, we're going to solve this thing, give us some money. We'll get there in front of the Armed Services Committee, which would indicate that it's not science, it's armed services. And this idea that there may be elements inside the government that really do know what's going on, and nobody's hearing about it.
Right. Well, yeah, there's a lot that's a distraction out there. And as far as who is in the know of everything that's going on, it's going to be a select few. So you'll have, I guess, just kind of being an example, you'll have one department over here that knows some. You'll have another department over here that knows some, and another department over here that knows some, but none of those three knows what the other areas know. They're all separate. There is a top upper echelon that knows each of those, but when you're actually working in that environment, you have no idea what's going on in the other areas. So it's just a handful of people that have the entire picture, and the president's not even privy to a lot of that. And I saw some of that in NSA where things were being hidden from the president. So
wow,
it's kind of scary to think of.
Wow. Yeah, because I think you're right, because I mentioned this thing that, I was a facility manager at university. I had keys for everything. I had the keys to the president's office, 8 vice president's offices, human resources, payroll. I knew vice presidents, the president, I knew all these people, whatever. And I left 6 months before a buyout. I said, do you think if I knew what was going on, I would have left before the buyout took place? It's sort of like everybody thinks that because you're in the government or you're at the university, you only know from your level down as to what's going on. And all you need is one person inside a facility or inside a department to move the material up to somebody above them. And he's the only one guy inside that knows what's going on, and he's moving it up. And even he doesn't know where it's going. So I think you're right on that. What's your most paranormal case that you've done? The story that you just went, wow, after it was over?
There are several. The one I talked about the black smoke morphing into the apparition of a little girl. That one completely blew my mind. The other one that was actually considered demonic that I mentioned earlier, I guess it was good 11 years ago now, but that one had so much activity going on with it. She was seeing
that case a little bit.
Yeah. With that one, she was seeing the adult daughter of the house was seeing a red-eyed shadow entity throughout the house. It was terrorizing her, it was terrorizing the cat. The other members of the household had seen this thing. And what was interesting about that household is they had been experiencing activity there for a good 20 years, and nobody was talking to each other until this incident started happening. So we investigated that case for several months. We were trying to determine, whether what was going on there was because there was a lot of dark history with the house. There was a suicide that had been in her bedroom. There was another attempted suicide, and then one that we couldn't confirm, but one of the retired police officers in the area tried to say that there was a boy who had asphyxiated himself in the closet, but we could never confirm that. but we knew for sure that the original homeowner's father had taken his life in the one room. So we're trying to determine if what we're interacting with is one of these people or if it's something else. And over time, the o- over time the case basically just started getting worse. Really, the activity started to amp up, where things were really moved or thrown around. The girl started taking on a lot different personality traits. She started becoming really almost a different type of person. And that was when we finally called in Carl Johnson. He came in to determine if this was, something that was actually demonic, which he ended up doing so. The crazy part about that case was when we did a cleansing of the house, try to get this thing, out and push it off the land. And during that night, as we were doing this cleansing, we had the family wait outside as we're going through the house. The girl, Taliesin, decided to come back into the house to use the restroom. And after she got out, she ended up in the master bedroom talking to something unseen against the one wall and asking questions like, why do you keep doing this? Why are you in the house? Why do you keep bothering my family? So Carl decided to do a blessing over her. And when he did this, she suddenly doubled over in pain, like she just got punched in the gut and fell to the floor. Upon review of the audio from that moment, there was actually a voice there that said, die, when she got hit in the gut. We got her back up on the bed. She was okay. But then we had a tri-field meter device that started going off in the other bedroom by the closet where she had kept seeing this entity. And then the back door started blowing open. We'd close the door and blow open again. And so all these different crazy things started happening. So we uh, kept up with the cleansing, pushed this thing out to the backyard. Carl continues doing his blessing in the backyard, and the wind back there had really started to kick up. The cats are just circling us, running around like crazy. And then all of a sudden, when Carl had finished his blessing, boom, the wind just died. So we went over to the side yard. We're like, okay, we're done talking to the family. And we made some remarks about, wow, that wind got really crazy, didn't it? And the family, which was just like 50 feet away in the side yard, were like, what wind? There was no wind over there at all. So it was just a really bizarre night with so many things happening. And we kept in touch with the family for several years. In fact, we just touched base with them again last year, and they've still been okay ever since that night.
Related question.
Mhm.
Have you done any work? You talked about the cleansing in
Yeah.
terms of trying to control it, or when people come to you in terms of you're being able to deal with it. You talked about the cleansing. If you've studied Stephen LaBerge at Stanford University with the Dream Lab, where he did the lucid dream thing, where he talks about you meet the demonic figure inside the dream, and he says you have two choices: you can turn around and run, or you can go and give it a big kiss, and will turn into a positive being and give you a positive message. This sort of idea that we can sort of control this. Are you able to move it? Because you mentioned the suicide thing, which
Yeah.
is kind of the idea that if we can build a house in the physical world, we can build a house in the spiritual world. We can create, these negative zones and stuff like that, almost like Skinwalker Ranch, which made me ask you about what do you think is going on at Skinwalker Ranch? Because that's the thing is, if you take a look at Skinwalker Ranch, you have all this sort of negative stuff happening. But if you go over to the Chris Bledsoe house, which has got 10 times the activity, there's nothing negative at all. Or if you go to Mission Rama and try to find a gray or a reptilian or any sort of negative thing in the Mission Rama group, which is 25,000 people, you don't find it. There seems to be these pockets of material. Do you think that we have the ability, if we were to learn a little bit more, to control this, to make it move, like if you've got a suicidal thing, to move that entity out or to cleanse the house?
I mean, that's a good question. I think a lot of what we can do is intention. What we put forth into the universe, we can on some degree at least be able to make it happen. I think it's I think it's something that as we continue to learn and grow, we can certainly do more of, and by putting forth that intention and basically manifest different things in our lives. As far as Skinwalker Ranch, I think, yeah, definitely highly you have that high electromagnetic anomaly that's there, and maybe it's been harnessed in different ways. I think it's certainly attracting a lot of this different activity to happen and manifest there. So I think it's when we look at these different energetic areas of the world, and we look at some of our different ancient sites of power. That's why the ancients built these locations like Stonehenge, the pyramids, and what have you on these locations, because they knew how to harness that energy and be able to use it. So with Skinwalker, I think it's one of those areas, and perhaps nobody's over the years built one of those sites of powers on top of it to do that. So we don't have those type of artifacts and those type of structures, but I think it's still the same properties that's there. Um, and just over time, I think, yeah, you have the more negative things that have happened there, and then, yeah, I mean, what are you trying to manifest? What do you want to do with that energy?
Yeah, because I even posted this morning, Brandon Fugel, who owns it
Hmm.
now, is a Mormon, and he talks about the fact that when they go onto the site, they pray.
Yeah.
He advises people to pray when they go on the site. And then I posted again this morning, Diane Pasolka talking about the gifting field, where Tyler D takes her and James, who's probably Gary Nolan, to the gifting field, and they pray, and he builds an altar on the site. And she said there's all these altars all over this site, and it's a government property with a fence. And she said all sorts of people putting altars there, and it's this sort of idea that we can sort of control the phenomena that we're part of the phenomena, I guess. Or even the idea that I had with you can maybe comment on the idea of the Skinwalker Ranch, that the Utes and the whatever the other tribe was have been putting curses on each other for 200 years, because everybody always gets it as this 400-acre Skinwalker Ranch. But I've seen some photographs from a ranch near there that make Skinwalker look like children's play. I mean, it's unbelievable, but we can't release it because the guy would have 40 black helicopters on his property
Right.
within a couple of hours. That it's that whole range. So do you think this curse thing, is that possible, where people can actually manifest an area that becomes very dark in terms of people doing this kind of stuff?
Well, I mean, okay, yeah. So the Navajo cursed the Utes, but yeah, how much of that is mindset? So they put a curse on you. Now it's in your head. So are you manifesting that yourself because they put the idea into your head? That could always be too. But yeah, it's not just confined to Skinwalker Ranch. It's that whole area. And my friend James Keenan has been doing a lot of research through that entire Uinta range, and he's detected a lot of interesting phenomena throughout that entire area, not just Skinwalker. So yeah, there's something interesting about that entire area.
Yeah, and related to that, like George Knapp had said, those that were the most aggressive to the phenomena had the worst experiences. And Brandon Fugel has said basically the same thing, that it has this reflective quality to it. So maybe have you dealt with this? We're actually talking about now on Facebook, is this whole hitchhiker effect. So they're saying, oh, this evil hitchhiker thing followed these guys home, and it affected their wives. And it's like, well, of course it affected their wives. And unless the guy's got a boyfriend in the closet, I mean, it's going to affect the wife. There's nobody else in the house. And this
Right.
Skinwalker, have you seen this in your cases where this effect takes place, where the person gets it and then it sort of spreads and it moves? Because to me, it's across the field. It happens in all
Yeah.
sorts of paranormal phenomena. The hitchhiker effect. It's not like some evil hitchhiker. It's just part of the phenomena.
Yeah, it's definitely part of the phenomenon. I've dealt with that with a number of people who, we went to some location to investigate, and they brought that energy home with them, and then they were report I got home, and then all these different crazy things started happening. For me personally, what I would do, walking out of a location like that, I could feel, okay, something's following behind me, even though there's nobody behind me, but I could feel like an energy following me out. And again, I think it just kind of comes down to intention. I'd turn around, even though it might not even be a human spirit or some sort of intelligent entity. It might just be an energy, but I would still turn around and say, no, you can't follow me. You have to stay here. I've never really had an issue coming home from those locations, but because I'll do that if I feel it following me out. But I know a lot of people who have had issues with something following them back. So yeah, the hitchhiker effect.
Now, let me think. I'm losing the question here. Okay. So if maybe this will be my last question, then you can ask some questions. In terms of you're like sort of have a lot of knowledge on this shadow. A lot of people may see this and have a shadow figure. What's your advice? 1, 2, 3. What should they do?
What should they do if they see a shadow? Try to find out a little bit more information about it. Because yeah, people will say, "Oh, I woke up and I saw a shadow," or my son says that he saw a shadow, or I saw something go down the hall. Really, it's like I need more information than just I saw a shadow. Because they're all a little different. Kind of like what we were talking about earlier. They may or may not be wearing hats. They could be very, translucent. They could just be, some bit of a wisp that just darts down the hall. They could be a solid figure. So I need to know a little bit more about it. And also, what is it doing? Is it just standing there, watching, observing? Did it physically interact with you? Is it, bothering you, or did it just show up? It's I need more information than just I saw a shadow.
Okay, but what would they do personally for themselves? How do they deal with it? Because a lot of people are going to be totally freaked out. It's like, oh, this guy was talking about that thing I saw. Oh my God. Yeah. They just sort of lose it. And that's part of your mission, is to bring the knowledge in terms of understanding, it's not the end of the world. It's not, it's probably not going to eat you or something like that. So what would you tell them in terms of dealing it for themselves, in terms of trying to come to cope with it?
Right. Yeah. And my approach is to ask them more questions about it, to get more information about, what's going on there. Because, if it is something that's bothering them, physically interacting with them, and of course they don't want that to happen, then I may suggest somebody local to come in, like we did that cleansing. So if they want it cleansed, they want it out of there, then I'll try to find somebody local for them to interact with and get that taken care of. Other times it might just, sometimes it's just, their recently deceased Aunt Trudy that's coming to visit. And so, and if we're going down that path, it's like, well, if Aunt Trudy is bothering you, then you can tell Aunt Trudy not to, not to come around anymore. Or if you're fine with knowing that's Aunt Trudy, then okay, you sit down and talk. And so it's really situational, but I'll get more information from them, and depending on what their answers are, kind of guide them down a certain path.
So
Are cleansings pretty well effective in terms of what percentage, if you go into the cleansing, that it goes away?
They can be. I mean, I think we were pretty lucky in that one there years ago. I haven't done one in a while, personally. We were pretty lucky with that one, that it was very successful, but we've done others where we've had to go back multiple times, to keep working on it. And that is usually the case, at least in my experience, where we'll have to go back multiple times. The first time around doesn't necessarily take, or the energy didn't get the idea that it's not welcome here, and so you have to go back and remind them, no, you need to go.
Yeah.
do you ever come across maybe where you think this phenomenon doesn't go away because it likes the attention? I kind of always think we notice these things and we can ignore them. If we ignore them, they may or may not leave us alone. But if you acknowledge it, that's, leading 2 more doors opening. You can acknowledge it and maybe tell it to go away, which I've tried to interact with my phenomenon over the last 3 years to see, what can happen. And very clearly told them to not scare my son and go away, and orbs left, and like with my nephew, him coming to me and saying that, and I told him, I said, you have a choice to let it go, ignore it, or ask him, just say, what are you and what are you doing? Trying to, change the script a little bit. So I don't know where I was going. I think I was commenting.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're asking about if they like the attention.
Yes,
and some of them probably do. Yeah,
Mhm.
some of them I think do, and but you still have to put your foot down and say, "Oh,
Right.
you can't be doing that." You can ignore for up to some point, and it's still going to try to interact with you. So at some point, you kind of have to put your foot down. If
Right.
you have the bully that's constantly pushing you in your back, yeah, at some point you gotta say something. But and then also in some cases, if this is Earth energy, if it's some sort of anomaly that's in the ground, that's interacting within your household, what can you really do about it? It's going to be there, so you have to learn how to best cope with it. If it's
Right.
an energy that's manifesting different things, it might be it might be a moment to moment thing. Like if at one point it attracts some sort of dark entity, at some point it attracts some sort of maybe lighter entity, or some of these other things that go on that people report. It just might be that that energy is attracting all of these different things to it, and you're just taking like almost like day to day.
Mm.
you know because what can you do? I mean, you're going to try to dig down into the ground and what? Remove what's down there? I don't know.
Might, if that's where your obsession takes you, you might.
Well, that's what they're doing at Skinwalker Ranch. They're busy. They said, "Don't dig," and then let's dig.
And then they start digging. Yeah.
Hey, I don't know though. It's like me. You tell me not to talk to Rick Doty, and that's what I'm gonna do. So dig, dig. Like, I don't know. My other advice, to my nephew was I did tell him he might want to turn off the Huggy Wuggy scary YouTube videos that he watches. I don't know if you've heard of Huggy Wuggy yet, but I think he's accidentally terrorizing young children all over the place now. So,
Yeah.
and it's manifesting as shadow people.
Wow.
Well, I mean, with young kids, they're impressionable. And I remember, one time when I was young, I can't remember what exactly it was that I was telling my mother, but I remember her threatening me with Scooby Doo, and she's like, if you keep saying this, that, or whatever it was I was doing, I'm gonna have to,
I
turn
think
off Scooby Doo on
we
you.
do
So,
often these days. Like, and that was every single morning getting ready for school. It was Scooby Doo.
yep, absolutely.
Built-in paranormal.
Any big projects you got coming up? What's in the future for you? Any speaking engagements?
Oh, well, I have so far I have a couple of speaking engagements set up for next year. Parapsychon, which is here in Ohio, and then there's Michigan Paracon in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. I have a tour to Ireland next summer. We're hitting a bunch of historic castles and some stone circles, things like that there. For whatever reason, Newgrange isn't on the docket, but I think it's because it's the high tourist season, so she's keeping us away from that area during that time. Project wise, I have several different book projects in the works. I just released my latest, which was Alaska's Mysterious Triangle, which was about all the phenomena happening up north.
Okay.
So that's kind of my big push for this year. But I had a docu-series that I released this past year called The Shadow Dimension, where I was researching the shadow phenomenon, going to locations that have reported portal and vortex activity in conjunction with the shadow activity as well. There's most of it was filmed during COVID, so I could only get out to a couple locations. So I'm going to be doing more of that for a season 2. So I'm piecing that together.
Yeah. Now I do a lot of work on portals, and I dealt with Tyler D on this, and Ron Pandolfi, and all these high level guys. What's your translation of a portal? What do you think a portal is?
Yeah. So portal to me is a gateway or a doorway into another dimension, another place in space time. Because a lot of people seem to interchange the terms vortex and portal. And to me, a vortex is that energy that wells up from the Earth's magnetic cords. That vortex energy that can spawn off the portals, which again could be like some sort of doorway or gateway or tunnel or whatever into another place in space time.
Okay. And do you think the government may have this? Because that was the indication that I was given a couple times, is they may not have anti-gravity, but even the Peniston book, if you read the Peniston book, he's saying to Kit Green, "So what the hell are you doing here?" And he's, "Oh, it's propulsion." He says, "Come on, you think I'm stupid? It's not propulsion. What do you mean?" He said, "Well, we're trying to figure out how does it pop in and how does it pop out, and interdimensional." So do you think the government maybe, well, it's the same question I asked before, but I guess the idea that they may be popping in and popping out, they're not really flying in, that they're using these sort of gateways to come in and then go back out again?
They could be. I certainly believe that the government is trying to do that. I mean, anti-gravity, of course, is another one they're trying to figure out. But as far as, utilizing portals, gateways, stargates, that type of technology, I believe they are at least trying to utilize it. And that could be what some of these things are.
Yeah.
And it could be that what we're seeing is actually our government having figured that out 50, 100 years from now, they're coming back from the future.
Okay, good. That's it for me.
Okay. I guess, I mean, my questions, I mean, you kind of you kind of talked a little bit about it earlier, the hooded shadow entity and that particular experience. Like I said, I've seen you one of your presentations, I think it was on Gaia, where you talked about that incident. And I didn't know if you had any additional information on
You're talking the Tyler D incident?
Yeah,
where, yeah. That I always wondered about the thing with the hooded figure, because it's always the idea. That's why I asked Tyler. I said, "Could you see its face?" Because the you can never see the face, and it's like, why can't you? But I remember then Chris mentioning, and that's what I sort of point out to people, is that the beings will actually change. So Chris, when he first saw the beings in 2007, they were bluish green, 7 feet tall. But when they got him in 2012, then he said they were hooded, and then he could actually see inside the hood, and they were etheric beings. They actually changed. And I've seen that a few times where the being actually changed. Nancy Tremaine is an example where it started as a reptilian, it moved to a human being, and then to an etheric being. So she just sort of sees it seamless, like, oh yeah, that makes sense to me. And it's like, well, it doesn't make any sense to the normal person that the being would actually change. So yeah, it was the thing that more impressed me about it was the fact that because he knew I was into downloads, that I had my own experience in 2012 with downloads. And then he brought this up, where this is where he got this sort of idea from. And if you see Diane Pasulka talk about it, she talks about the fact that he has this protocol where, he goes to bed and he sleeps for 8 hours, and he gets up for an hour, and then he goes back to bed for an hour, and then he gets a tall glass of water and he sits in the sun and he drinks the sun, and then drinks the water in the sun, and suddenly the beings start talking to him. And Gary Nolan has the same sort of thing, where he's got this protocol, which makes me think maybe these guys know something we don't know. Is he's got the protocol. He says, I don't know how it works, but I know how to make it work. He tells a story about working through all the problems, putting the question beside the bed, and waking up in the morning with the answer in his head. And so to me, it's this idea that it's to listen to these people on the leading edge, where you think like, this guy knows something. Listen very carefully. You don't have to evaluate, believe, disbelieve. But I would see that whole aspect, and that's why I asked Tyler about the face. I think it was what's his name also saw the guy that wrote the book, 190 books on paranormal phenomena, Brad Steiger. I think that's how it started with him, with Elijah. Do you know that story? Where Elijah shows up at the side of the bed, and it's a hooded figure, and he can't see the face. And he believes that Elijah, this being, actually gives him all these books, and he writes like 190 paranormal books, and you see it repeated over and over again, this idea. And the thing that is always interests me is this bizarre thing where, rather than it just being a story, you wonder, why does it have this particular aspect? Like, why do aliens not wear clothes? And then when I ask them, I say that, and then they always could do the same thing. They go, let me think. No, I never thought about it. But no, he didn't have any clothes. And it's like, you never thought about it? And then I say, do you have any sex organs? They go, no, I don't think he had any sex organs either. And it's like these weird things that sort of indicate, almost like the fact that you may not be in Kansas anymore. Something weird is going on here. Time and space has disappeared. Whereas people just sort of tell it as a story. And it's these bizarre aspects that sort of indicate that something more revealing is going on. So I've talked to a few people who've had the beings with the where you can't see the face, and right. But Tyler was the most important one, because he's a guy who, from all impressions, actually knows what's going on. I mean, actually, if you've ever heard the story where he goes to the kids, where he goes to the Blutzel family with the 2 pieces of metal. Have you ever heard that story?
I haven't
when you
heard
hear that
one.
story, then you go like, this guy knows what's going on. So Ryan tells the story where Tyler D comes to the house, and he says, hold out your hand, Ryan. He puts this piece of metal in his hand, and then he said, okay, now he puts another piece of metal in his hand, and he said this vibration starts going through his arm, And then he says, "Oh, you've had a face-to-face encounter with the beings." And he said, "You know that?" And then he went through the whole family, and the girlfriend, Chris Bledsoe's Jr.'s girlfriend, was the only one that didn't get any effect from these two pieces of metal. Chris Bledsoe basically went into he froze up. He just like went convulsed when they put these two pieces of metal in his hand. And so when you see that, like, how does Tyler know this thing about the two pieces of metal? It's almost like they're like a mile ahead of everybody else, and yet he doesn't get talked about. Nobody knows about him. And so when I had the opportunity to actually talk to him, and yet he has the same sort of thing that you and I have, is that he doesn't, he gets sort of, nobody believes him. Because I remember I talked to him on the phone one time at Huntsville. He was in a restaurant. He told me a story about his daughter, where his daughter said, "Dad, you got to quit talking about this stuff. This is crazy. This is crazy stuff." And he said, "Just remember where the Lexus came from." And then she sort of shut up because he made a lot of money. But even his own daughter wouldn't believe him. And it was like, and this is maybe the guy who's, took Chris into the conference room where the only 350 people have ever been, where the astronaut conference room, and he's been up on the gangplank where they put the Apollo 11 astronauts, and you see the access that he has, and you realize, like, wow. I mean, it's important to pay attention, I think. But the shadow figure thing, I haven't really followed that much. I've been more into what the beings mean, because in terms of the different types of beings, because you see this again, the pattern where it starts as they're always out of date in terms of the dress, like they're 20 years out of date. Even in the 1890s, we're talking about that. They're wearing these weird clothes that were out of date. And then they were from Mars, and then they said, then we realized there's not anybody on Mars, and then they said, oh, and now we're from Alpha Centauri and from Zeta Reticuli, and then when we got into multi-dimensions, then suddenly they were from multi-dimensionals, and now we're into the simulated universe, and now they're saying, oh, we're from here, there is no time and space, it's all here, we've always been here, all that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of stuff where I look at all the weird parts of the story to try to figure out why are these, why do they not have mouths? Why don't they have ears? Why don't they have hair? And these sort of repeated stories, or why before 1961, when the Greys appeared, why did you have people reporting beings with space helmets on and little hoses that go down into a tank on their back? And you see this sort of, that we're reflective of what we're seeing, that we're part of the thing, whereas people believe it's separation, it's us and them, and we're completely separate.
Well, let me ask you this then. So hooded figure shows up at the end of the bed, doesn't have any features, relays some information. What do you think it is personally, with all the information you've gathered so far?
Well, that's why I think the first question I asked you is this idea of what is reality. It's this idea, like, these beings, what they're telling me, and everything that they see seems to sort of fit, is what it's an illusion. It's all an illusion. It's all you. It's all in your head. There is no out there. I mean, it's like John Wheeler said, there's no out there. Consciousness is primary. And it's this idea that it may be like this simulated universe thing, that we are all the same thing, and we're having these experiences within ourselves. And that's where you get this crossover in terms of, you see what you intend to see. And because what I did one time is I took all the grays. So people say, oh, it's a gray. And everybody seems, oh, yeah, it's a gray. Look, everybody knows what a gray looks like. And yet when I started putting them, I took Barney Hill, whose gray had a hat on. I said, what, he got a baseball team on Zeta Reticuli? The gray's wearing a hat. I mean, you just say, like, that's almost like in the idea of the dream science, where if you look at the lucid dream research, that's how they teach you to get lucid in the dream, is you got to record your dreams and get the dream sign, these weird things that should not be happening in the dream. And then when you realize what the dream sign is, when you're in the dream, you pick up on this thing that you're not in Kansas anymore. And so when I put all the grays together, I suddenly realized, like, they don't look to anyone. Andreasen's gray looks totally different. Whitley Strieber's gray looks totally different. Barney Hill's, and you start putting them on top of each other, and they don't. Everybody's just using this term. And so the important thing to me is that we are much more a part of this thing. It's much more consciousness. Whereas the way we want to do it is we have this, because I had this download, and one of the things they gave me was this thing is it all connected? Is it all one thing, or is it separate? If it's all connected, then that's one world with one rules and regulations. But if it's all disconnected, then it's a different world with different rules. And so the idea is it's all this connected thing. We're tapped in. We're all sparks of the divine. And I've even gone as far as to say, I mean, this is the belief, is that God did not create the heaven and the earth. God created the sparks of the divine, and that we are creating the universe through thought. It's the more I go along, the more I go into this sort of simulated universe theory, that
Yeah.
we are part of what we're seeing. And that, what's his name does this? Mike Cleland always does this. When people see owls or something, he always says,
Okay.
okay, what was the thought in your head just before you saw the owl? And he said, always shows it's very significant. It's this idea that we sort of think it's a separate object and it came in, we've got nothing to do with it. In fact, that we are, I think, in a large part manifesting in some way. There's an event taking place. There's an experience, almost like abduction experience. When you start to question, there's an event taking place, but when you start talking to people at length, you start hearing, like Betty Andreasen says, I was on this and I went in this ship and I was there and I was doing this and these beings and I went on a different ship and this whole event. And then she comes back to the house and comes in and she says, and I walked into the bedroom and I was shocked. I was sitting on the side of the bed. And so I went back into my body and this whole idea that it's not what you think it is. It's so we sort of seeing is believing. And the more I look at it, the more complex it gets. And the more it seems to have this idea that we are a big part of what is happening around us. We think we're separate from it, but I think we influence a lot of what we see.
Yeah, the ideas of simulated universe fascinate me. For one, I have a degree in simulation programming, so I've kind of gone down that road several times, just from a computer programming aspect. But you look at our world religions, and we see the idea of we're here for a temporary amount of time. Like with reincarnation, we're here for a temporary part of time, then we pass away, but we go on somewhere else, and then we come back. So it's that whole idea of getting into, and I don't think it's necessarily a computer program like the Matrix. I think it's something that's more organic, biological, molecular in nature, that sort of thing. But it's this constant cycle, back and forth, back and forth. And even with with Christianity, they talk about we're here preparing to go on to another world. So it's still that kind of idea. They just don't call it a simulation in religion, but the idea is there. So I think it's always been with us. And so it's a road that I'm starting to do more research on as I get into the kind of quote unquote connected universe.
They're playing a lecture that I did at Paula's conference tomorrow, and in there I talk about this whole thing. The whole idea of Donald Hoffman gets into this idea that everything you see is a desktop icon. You cannot see reality. When you're driving the little car in the video game, you are not driving a car. It is way down there. And I refer to the guy who is a co-developer of Pixar Studios, writes an entire book called The Pixel. And he's trying to get across the idea that you do not see pixels. They are invisible. And this idea that everything's just a little square. And he says you've got billions of pixels in your cell phone, but you don't have any photographs. And he's trying to explain it's a one-dimensional object. And so when I get into that, I think that is where we're going to be ending up, is that you cannot touch reality. It's like the Tao that can be named is not the Tao. Once because the left brain wants to put a name on it. Once we start naming it and giving it colors and levels and stuff like that, we're moving away from what actually is. I don't think we can actually see reality. It's almost like the implicated universe of David Bohm. It's there, and we're looking at this, what Donald Hoffman is referring to, this desktop icon. We can never actually see the pixel. We can never actually see the reality. We're just looking at something in between, and we assume that that's reality. And so these beings would all be the same thing. They're projecting as a certain thing, almost like the Barbra Streisand stepson, because they need you to understand what it is. If they talk to you in 1895 about simulated universe, the person is going to go, what are you talking about? You have to be at the person's level. And so they would use things that you believe. Even Kit Green, if you look at the Pendleton book, he talks about that. This idea you brought up before is that when you get two people, they see two different things. And Kit Green refers to this in this study that they did of experiences, which nobody's picking up on. They had 8 people working on this, and they were looking at experiences. And that's what he said, is that depending upon your belief system will determine what you see.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the context that you're familiar with. And actually, when we were talking about cleansing and things like that earlier, that's the same type of philosophy that I'll tell people when they're like, what can I do in my home? Well, it's going to be whatever your belief system is. I can't sit there and tell you, if you're a Christian, do these different Native American chants and that will push out whatever, because that's not your belief system. It has to be something that you truly fully believe in. So that makes sense in this context as well, that if this is what your belief system is, that is what you'll be able to relate to. So yeah, it makes total sense.
And the other thing that you just brought up is this thing with the belief system. I think that's extremely important. is that it's all belief. People say, no, it's not. And I say, yeah, it's all belief. And it depends how strong your belief is in terms of what you're going to manifest. Almost like people will say we're Christians or whatever. And Jesus says, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to here, and it will do it, and nothing shall be impossible. And that's this idea that the stronger your belief is, that we just don't have the very strong belief system. We sort of are always in doubting, and that belief is all what it's about, is that you can actually manifest whatever you want, but it's depending upon, so people don't realize that their belief system is what's dragging them around by the end of their nose. That we think, no, we're independent, we're objective, and it's like, no, you're not. It's like, it's you see even the idea of ego, where people are arguing, and ego is basically, what do you own, what is your belief system, and what do people think about you? And people are defending this ego, this belief system, because like if you take a look at our thing that threatens guys who went to MIT at $45,000 a year, and they'll say, if you are right, everything I learned was wrong. And it's like, well, nobody's going to give up what they believe their whole life. And people don't realize how strong belief systems are. You even see American politics, when you start to argue, the people just go farther into their corners. Nobody resolves anything. And belief, people, I think, underestimate the power of belief.
Yeah, when it comes to a lot of things like that, we see it when we look at our lost and ancient civilizations, that there's a degree of pride that's within there. People have made careers, this has been their life's work. I've been doing this for 40 years. I've written 10 books on this. Is what I've been teaching in my classrooms for all these years. If you're going to throw that up on its head, then everything that I've done for my entire life seems to be meaningless. And but I would almost argue against that, though. It's like, no, it wasn't meaningless. It was just a stepping stone to get to the next place. And whatever that next place is, that is also a stepping stone to the place after that.
Yeah. Or the idea they gave me, and they hammered it into my head, is you have not got a clue. I won't give you the swear words to use, but they said, you have not got a clue. You think you know what's going on. You have not got a clue. Everything you think, not only is it wrong, it's exactly the opposite. And the more it's gone along, the more that appears to be. But people will fight for their belief systems, and I think it's a matter of time until it's almost like Max Planck said. The idea of science advances one funeral at a time. And you mentioned that you put the information forward, and then Nicole's son will run with it. Somebody, because to them they really don't care. I mean, there's life in outer space. They don't have these hang-ups. And that's what's blocking us, is the belief system that prevents us from doing it. So I think we're just doing the job that we're supposed to do. You and I have the thing, and I do the exact same thing as you. I just take whatever I can. I don't keep any secrets, which I used to have some very high level people that talk to me, but I could never keep my mouth shut. And what's the point? I mean, what's the point of me keeping it to myself? If I figure it out, how does that help anybody? So I think I'm with you, that you put whatever you can on the table, without any sort of as little, this is exactly the way it is, just put it out there, and somebody's going to pick up on it, somebody's going to run with it, and eventually it'll get figured out. And that is what I see my role is, and I think you see it the same way, is you do what you can do, and that's all you can do.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with you. And, over time, I've changed my mind on different topics. And I have that as the introduction to my A Walk in the Shadows book. I have a caveat on there. It's like, I reserve the right to change my mind, because what I knew 10 years ago is different than what I know now. What I'm going to know 10 years from now is going to be different
I even
than
say
what I
the
know.
next day. I say what I say today.
Yeah, it could be the next day. Yeah.
I have reserved the right to correct it. I see it as like a giant chess game. I was very good playing chess when I was a kid. And that's the way I think you got to look at it, is you look at it like, that's where I look at these weird things like, why do aliens not have clothes? It's like a chess game. It's like, why the hell did you move that piece? And you assume that the universe isn't stupid, that it knows what it's doing. And it's like, this has got to mean something. Like, what does this mean? And you just play it like a chess game, like you're playing a game to win, and it becomes a very exciting thing. I think you probably find the same thing. Like, you almost feel sorry for people who are sitting there watching TV at night. It's like, my goodness, I mean, this is the most exciting thing you could possibly be doing, because you're sort of on the leading edge of thought and what's possible and stuff like that. And it obsesses you, which is where I think I call it the theory of wow, where they're doing weird things to get you down the rabbit hole where you can't get out. You're obsessed with this whole thing, because that's what they want. That's how they're dropping the breadcrumbs, and you and I are following the breadcrumbs and revealing this thing. And that's how it works. They're not here, as I say, to bring us freedom, democracy, Jesus, and McDonald's. We tried that kind of stuff. It doesn't work. they come in and they get you to figure it out for yourself. That you become curious and you're trying to figure it out. And then when you figure it out for yourself, you go, oh, I know how it works. And then it's set. It's not like somebody told you that.
Yeah, no, I totally understand what you mean. And yeah, I like the idea of breadcrumbs because they'll kind of drop you a little bit here, a little bit there. And, some of them will actually take me back to things from years and years ago, like the whole Alaska Triangle thing. Well, I mean, I was stationed in Alaska 25 years ago, but my research had gotten to the point where I'm starting to go down these different rabbit holes. And all of a sudden, here's this breadcrumb of this, production crew, calling me up about some different things in Alaska. And all of a sudden now I'm right back down that rabbit hole in Alaska, things that I experienced 25 years ago. Now I'm writing about it and it's leading me on into these other directions. But it's interesting how the past is or really the future influenced the past there and the past influenced the future. It's just, all that is just amazing to me, how it just all connected like that.
They drop it. I had a couple experiences. The one where I realized my experience in 75 wasn't random. And I won't get into that one, but the one I will tell you is the one that you probably heard, the one with Tyler D, where when I had this meeting with him, we were in this cottage in Pennsylvania. And I didn't know who he was. He wasn't used. He didn't have a secret name at the time or anything like that. And he knew I had the download thing. And he actually put me on to a girl who's an experiencer. He was following her. She was recording her premonitions and stuff like that, and reporting everything that was happening to him. And she had a journal and stuff like that. And she lived really close to me here in Canada. So I went, oh, cool. And then he pulls out his cell phone. He shows me the photos. You heard about this photo. Shows me this photo of these two guys flying through space in pajamas. And they look like the pajamas, and it's a painting. And he says, what do you think of this? Like, he doesn't say this is what it is. He just says, what do you think of this? I go, I don't know. And he said, all right, what about this one? He shows these three photos, paintings of an eclipse taking place. And then the third photo was these balls, bigger balls going into smaller balls in the middle. And he says, what do you think of that? And I go, I have no idea. I have no idea. And he keeps going. Then he shows me this 56 Chev on top of this building. And he says in the back seat, there's this postcard, and it's this girl writing to her boyfriend or vice versa, how I wish I could travel through time to be with you. And I'm going, I don't know. I have no idea what you're talking about. He says, you know where that is? And I go, no, where is it? He said, the Hughes Aircraft Building in LA. And I go, still doesn't mean anything to me. I have no idea. And then he said, well, that's where the jump room was. But he didn't say it's real. He didn't say it's not real. And then it's like 2 years later, I'm saying to myself, and it occurs like with your Alaska thing, I'm sitting there. Why did he show me these photographs? Because I immediately went, as soon as I went to LAX, I went to this building, and sure enough, the paintings were on the wall. I photographed them. He said, watch out for the guard. And then I'm thinking, why did he show me? He didn't say this is real. And I'm thinking, why did he go to the building? If there's nothing to this, why did Tyler D go to the Hughes Aircraft Building and take these photographs of the paintings? And the one with the two guys flying through space is right outside the elevator where this whole Mars jump room thing is supposed to take place. And that's the thing where it drags you back in and you go like, wow, it's like just, and that's happened to me a few times where something happens and 25 years later, suddenly you figure out what it was all about.
Right. Yeah. It suddenly clicks. Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah. 25 years later, and there it is again. It's fascinating.
Yeah. It is a fascinating subject. So I appreciate your sharing with us. And any last questions, Nicole?
No, I could just sit here and listen to it back and forth though. Like I love this because it's just wherever the conversation takes you. So
it's up to you and Will to take it to the next step.
Yep.
To push it and unravel this thing.
I think what you guys are talking about, a lot of us discuss and we just blanket it, call it these synchronicities. Synchronicities, happen day to day, and sometimes they stretch back all the way to the beginning of your life and just everything clicks. So it's nice. My big synchronicity was like moving to Cape Girardeau and then leaving Cape Girardeau. And then, like you said, Mike, it's like, you find out all this stuff and you're like, what? I was right in the middle of it. It's like, why was I doing this when I was there? So gave me an excuse to go back several times. And
maybe Mike, that you brought up synchronicities, Mike can give him his take on synchronicities.
Oh.
I certainly think there's something to it. My girlfriend, also named Nicole, we have a lot of interesting synchronicities where all of a sudden, and we've only known each other really for a year and a half, but all of a sudden we'll just say the same thing at the exact same time or have the exact same thought, or she'll put on a movie that I was just thinking about that movie, and so it's just amazing. I think people can kind of tune into that whether you want to call it the same wavelength or whatever it is, there's certainly a connection there that's happening that that people are tuning into. And when we talk about resonance and vibration and frequency and all that, I think that that happens a lot where going back to like the shadows and apparitions. Some people see more shadows than apparitions. Other people see more apparitions than shadows. And I think it's because your personal vibration is becoming in tune to whatever the vibration is of those particular entities. So I think when you're kind of with somebody, or at least you and that person are kind of on the same path, the same journey, that same wavelength, whatever, you're tuning into that information and that frequency a lot more often together at the same time.
Wow. Let me just drop one thing here, because it just occurred to me, maybe a little controversial, but I have an interview with Dan Pasolka, and I probably will ask her about this, but there's a story that a couple of the major guys converted to Catholicism, that there's this religious aspect of this thing, that the guys who were in the know suddenly became Catholic. So you went the one way, and just as sort of a heads up that this may be part of the story. Even this thing where Tyler D goes to the site and starts to pray. These are things that I don't think many people. Whitley Strieber's talked about it a little bit, but this is a thing that I think is kind of an interesting thing that may come out in the future. That there's this sort of a reversal of spirituality coming back into this field, in terms of it just being nuts and bolts, that people are realizing, not just consciousness. I guess we use the word consciousness, whatever it is. I mean, even consciousness is naming it, but whatever it is, some sort of basic thing. But it's, as I would say, it's going to be 1,000 times more complex, a lot more spiritual, which people won't like, and it won't have a hint of capitalism. And that's so.
No, spirituality is, I mean, there's a difference between spirituality and religion. So, so praying and trying to put, those intentions out there to the universe, totally fine. I have a problem with the whole organized religion part of it. And, I say that, but, I respect a lot of the heritage, from my Catholic upbringing. I think, some of the cathedrals are beautiful. And there's a lot of history within. There's some dark and bad history as well. But, as with everything, of course. But there was somewhere I was going to go with that. Because you hit on something that I want to
out there for you a little bit, Grant. Like, I mean, maybe the revisiting of, Catholicism is the fact that they were never embedded in Catholicism to begin with. Like, they truly didn't understand what they were brought up in. And so it's come to them in their elder years that maybe there is more to it than just, the stand Neil, Hail Mary, Our Father.
There's a story that was told by Whitley Strieber that he was actually passed a message to one of them. They wanted the idea, they wanted to know, what should we do? And it came back to this thing about, I don't know, it was, you need to be not more spiritual, or you need to go in that direction. I forget how it was termed, but I was kind of surprised when Whitley told that story. And you see this sort of a reversal of thought, where it's so materialistic, the dogma right now. And yet when you look at the consciousness thing and what quantum physics is going and all this kind of stuff, you see this reversal in terms of the fact that this post-materialistic, I guess, paradigm, that we've done the materialism thing, and now we have to balance it back off with the fact that it's not made out of little nuts and bolts. We're not biological robots in a random meaningless universe and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more to it. I think, like with most things, it kind of goes in cycles. So, we've kind of, over the last several years, have kind of come out of, a lot of that organized religion. And I think as we kind of relearn what spirituality is, because we've kind of been in a state of flux here for a while, I think people will come back in and try to put rules onto the new spirituality that we've started to develop. And even, I kind of joked around on a podcast a few weeks back that, I'm no longer considered a Catholic. I guess according to my parents, I would be considered a non-practicing Catholic, but I don't go to the Catholic Church. But I was kind of joking around. I was like, my newer religion is, universal. I believe in the connected universe and all that. But the funny thing is that, the word Catholic actually means universal. So,
There you go.
so it's still the same thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
My little Catholic story was I was, born Catholic. So there's not that choice involved. But I was the one in catechism, like with all the crazy questions, and so I got taken out of catechism and actually spent a lot of time with my father of the church. Like catechism would be going on, we'd be talking to the church. And the best thing he said to me was I needed to quit worrying about Catholics and not Catholics, because we're all Catholics. We're just good Catholics and bad Catholics. So just look at it that way. And you're right. Like once a Catholic, always a Catholic. I don't think they kick you out. You're just non-practical.
You have to do something really, really bad to get excommunicated. So.
Right. Well, and my big thing at the time was like the Muslim faith. It seemed like when I was little, it seemed pit against Catholicism, and wars and all this stuff. So I didn't understand. And he's like, Muslims are just bad Catholics. Catholics are just bad Muslims. Like, just look at it that way. Like, yeah. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, we all have the same origins there. And even going back to, that common ancestor of Abraham. I mean, he was Mesopotamian. He came out of the city of Ur. So,
right.
So he wasn't.
Yeah. Even Jesus says, first take the log out of your own eye, then you'll be able to see well enough to see the speck in your brother's eye. Judge not that you be not judged. Or when they were going to stone the Mary or whatever, he said, Jesus, are you going to help a stoner? Let he who is perfect cast the first stone. So we're all sort of in this soup of trying to figure out what's going on, and you put out what you can, and eventually we'll all figure it out. But this idea that we can actually judge and put people in little categories, I guess, has probably got to stop. But it won't. I mean, it's something we got to grow the same as everything else. That it's not going to happen overnight, and we have eternity to figure it out.
Wonderful.
Agreed.
Beautiful.
Eternity to figure it out, and every once in a while we get to swap out the meat suit. All right, gosh, this was so fun, guys. And
absolutely.
We can chat again, like anytime, and see you on the circuit. It's been so fun seeing you like out in the world now. It's exciting to live vicariously through your posts.
Thanks. Yeah, it's definitely been a busy year. But I hope we do get a chance to cross paths here again soon. And Grant, pleasure talking with you, and I hope to meet you in person here someday soon.
And if you've got something you want to promote, let us know, and we'll promote it.
Okay, sounds fantastic.
Beautiful.
Great, guys.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
Take care. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.